let's crack on. I think this is going to be more like a fireside chat than a full panel, but certainly welcome to the last session, and for the future recording of this, welcome to the panel on linking ICT with climate change in a low carbon future. My name is Jeremy Foster. It's my pleasure to be moderating this discussion. I'd just like to do a quick roundtable, introduce our key contributors to this discussion. We have Robin Blake, representing ICT Qatar, and the Government of Qatar as our host nation. We have Gisa Furtai-Pursell, representing many hats, I note, and today climate change from the International Telecommunications Union. We have Luis Neves, who works for Deutsche Telekom as Chief Sustainability Officer, and also the Global E-Sustainability Initiative. We have Christian Blondin from the World Meteorological Organization, welcome, and also Matilda Gustafsson from Ericsson, Director of Sustainability. So I thought I'd kick off by starting with Robin as the host nation to give us a couple of comments on, when you think about linking ICT, when you think about improving our climate, when you think about the carbon footprint, what are the things that come to mind, and particularly from an ICT Qatar perspective, please?
Thank you. I tend to look at both ends of the spectrum. There's a whole value chain of people involved in bringing about climate change, and I'm particularly interested in both ends of it. At the one end, the government view: how can governments create policies and practice which will have an impact on changing the whole of that value chain? And at the other end, how can the individual, how can the people, how can their behaviours change, and what can we do to encourage them to change, to bring about a bottom-up change, so a top-down and a bottom-up change. For me, the single most important element of that whole value chain are the people. I think creating circumstances which allow them to behave in ways which will bring about a sustainable change and a reduction in carbon, I think is going to be most effective. Each and every one of us has a small part to play. Each of them, as individuals, might think their part contributes only a small piece, but cumulatively and over a long time, that for me is going to be where the most significant changes will be. So I'm as much interested in bringing about behaviour change as I am of introducing new technologies. The technologies may be the enablers that will bring about those change, but if people don't use them effectively and efficiently, if they don't know the benefits that can be brought and the changes it can bring, we're not going to get anywhere.
Gisa, you represent in this forum the ITU, the collective, or the IT arm of the United Nations, which is the collective interest of all of the governments, I guess. If you would now take us up to a 60,000 foot perspective and you think about how we can see ICT impacting the carbon footprint, impacting climate change, what are the top line issues that you see in your travels?
First of all, I'd like to thank the government of Qatar for hosting COP18 and the very warm welcome that we continue to receive since our arrival. And in particular, I want to thank Dr. Hessa and the Ministry of ICT Qatar for their commitment to setting up this side event. And I would like to acknowledge Ericsson, and Ericsson is an ITU member, sector member, for partnering with us for this event. We believe that ICT should be at the top of any outcomes adopted by COP18 conference. ICT is a true platform for progress and poverty eradication, and they should be recognized as a basic infrastructure that helps address climate change issues and at the same time bridge social divides and achieve sustainable development goals. I mean, when we look at it today, with over 6 billion people, 6 billion mobile cellular subscriptions, and over 2 billion people online, almost everyone on the planet is within reach of ICTs. And these technologies are increasingly seen as essential infrastructure in a modern society, on par with transportation, water networks, for example. And with ITU being a United Nations specialized agency for information and communication technologies, 193 members and over 700 private sector or sector members, ITU is committed to connecting all the world's people using ICT. And the other thing is ITU also allocates global radio spectrum and satellite orbits, develops technical standards to ensure networks and technologies seamlessly interconnect, and strives to improve access to ICTs. And also ITU and the World Meteorological Organization, they work in partnership to make sure that frequency spectrum is provided to enable every country to receive climate change information in real time, every time.
And it's great that you mentioned industry, and I think the most exciting thing about the ICT industry is the change we bring to every other industry. In the previous session we heard about studies where we see industries evolving themselves, and I noted that activity and functional optimization, process system integration, these kind of things are the key cornerstones. And Lewis, just bringing you in, I wonder if there was an industry that you felt was really pioneering the use of ICT to transform itself. There was one that you might say, those guys are really doing a great job. Who would that be? Who pops to mind?
Would you like me to mention a single industry?
Choose one. What's your favorite one?
Actually, that would be a challenge. I think if you look to today's world, many industry sectors are using more and more ICT. If you think about now the implementation of smart grids, you need ICT. So the energy sector needs ICT to make sure that everything is interconnected. If you look at transportation, now in Germany it's amazing. Wherever you go, you see the railway, you see the underground. So it's you have information on real time, and these things are helping people really on their daily lives. And of course ourselves as companies, as a sector, we are putting more and more intelligence in our activities, also in terms of walking the talk. One thing that we need as companies, as a sector, is to make sure that the technology that we are promoting, that we are selling, is used on our own operations, and we make good use of it. And I come back to the human dimension, and it's about the employees. So we are used to go to our office building. I work in an office building with 4,000 people, and every day I ask myself, why the hell 4,000 people are coming to this office? There is no need for that. We can work from everywhere, with our iPads. We are mobile. We have a huge network. We have a fantastic network. We can use everywhere. We don't need to come every day to the office. So we need to change the way that we work and live. And if we do that, we will live much better, and we'll be giving a huge contribution to climate change, because we don't need to use transportation, car, moving to the town every day. And this is a fundamental transformation that needs to take place. If you think about modern cities, so what is happening in China? Those huge cities with 20 million people, they are not sustainable. They need intelligence, they need ICT. So it's ICT to be used with the building industry, with the transportation industry, with the energy industry, and so on. This is happening, but at a very slow pace. And we need that to happen faster, so we can realize the 9.1 gigatons of CO2 that we are predicting up to 2020.
9.1 gigatons of CO2. I'm not a scientist. I work for Ericsson. Christian Blondin, from the World Meteorological Organization. What's your role in all of this? And particularly, one of the things that I think is kind of interesting for us as consumers is, how do we understand what these terms mean, and how should we look to try and draw clues that things are not going so well and that we should really be concerned?
Thank you. As was already mentioned by Mrs. Purcell, the World Meteorological Organization is a United Nations specialized agency which deals with weather, climate, water, and connected environmental issues. I would like to use the same, perhaps, picture than was used already by Mr. Blake of the value chain. I mean, the weather and climate has to go from observation to services to end users, and on each steps in this value chain, ICT is absolutely essential. As has been touched upon by Mrs. Purcell already, we need radio frequency allocation to preserve the observation of essential elements of the atmosphere and the surface. Then we need to transmit the products which are delivered or computed through big computers. Now we need also broadband to transmit this product, numerical product, to not only national meteorological services, but also to a lot of end users, whether it's private or public companies. And at the end of the day, what matters is ICT is able to put the information available, timely, and reliably to the one who needs this the most. And with Ericsson, we have a very nice, at the time being, very nice experiment, field experiments around Lake Victoria, when we provide fishermen, a large community of fishermen, with mobile phones so that they can get early warning of severe weather on the Lake Victoria. You may not know, but per year, before, there were 5,000 people dying on Lake Victoria because not aware of the storms and the waves that are going to happen, may happen on this lake. So it is a nice example where technology is not only helping the economy and big companies, but also helping one of the poorest and most vulnerable people in the field.
And now we get, you've handed it over nicely to Ericsson, and I wonder, representing the vendor community, you start to see, initiatives in terms of the infrastructure that we provide, the fibre systems, the cell sites, all of these things which we continue to drive efficiencies in that. Which are the ones that spring to your mind when you think about where we try and at least look in our own back garden to make sure we're using the minimum amount of energy possible to deliver what we need to for our customers and, of course, consumers at the end of the day?
Yes, so first of all, thank you for this with the Mobile Weather Alert project, which is a very, very interesting and hands-on project, really helping the ones who really need to get the help, and where technology has proven to deliver that. And from the ICT industry, it's fundamental to show what we can do within our own industry efficiency. And what we have done also is this broadband bridge, the linking ICT with climate change, which now is available in Arabic and a number of other languages as well, to spread the knowledge with the potentials of ICT, but also, of course, addressing the question what we ourselves can do as an industry regarding energy efficiency and reducing absolute energy consumption, which I think is vital to always discuss and have in mind. It's one thing to have energy efficiency as a target, but the absolute number is what we really need to aim for, to reduce and at least to keep it at the same level. In the Broadband Bridge report, what we are looking into here is concrete examples from all over the world, the good best practices that we can spread and learn from. Because we have to understand that the conditions are very different from one country to another, from one region to another, but that there are elements that we can share and that we can support each other with. So, for example, coming back to teleworking in Australia, they're putting now targets on teleworking to be able to introduce teleworking with the help of ICT, and also bringing in ICT to support the development of smart grids. We also see on the policy part to support, how can the ICT industry co-work with other sectors. So in Sweden, for example, the Minister of ICT is also the Minister of Energy. So that's interesting, how we can interlink ICT and energy in the area of smart grids. And then, of course, looking at the area of a total city approaches, there are very interesting examples in Southern Korea with the Songdo city, where they really want to use the smartness to build smart, sustainable cities. And then in our own industry, to always have tough targets to reduce our CO2 emissions, to be part of working on standardizations to secure that we actually can compare apples with apples. I think that's a fundament as well, that we can measure and really say, we know that this is this level and this is an apple that you can compare with this apple. So when we talk about reductions, we really know what we're talking about.
Now I'd like to come back to Gesa and Robin and ask you the same question, and maybe you can answer from a global and a Qatar perspective. One of the challenges as we were preparing for this discussion was the reality that, you know, the industry that sells energy, they like selling energy. They're in the business of selling energy. And of course the impact of that is it creates carbon impact. And so we kind of have this pressure, if you like, between one industry and another industry. And I was wondering, how do we create policies which help balance that off? Because by nature, even that we are trying to look for ways to use less energy, somewhere else is a room with people trying to figure out how we can use more energy, because that's how their industry works. So I wonder, Gesa, from a global UN perspective, when you think about, you know, the interests of those energy providers, how do we get them to buy into that using less energy is a good thing? How do we do that from a global perspective? And then maybe I can ask you, Robin, from a Qatar perspective, how you see that. Would you like to go first from a global perspective, please, Gesa?
What we can do, we really need ICTs. You know, this is the way for us to convince and to work with the energy sector to make sure that we put policies in place so that they can look at green ways of obtaining energy, and then it's all about capacity building. Getting the people to understand that there are ways where we can faster provide the capacity to the energy industry, because while we say ICT is great, let's not forget that ICTs also contribute, you know, to GHC. But there are ways where we can work together with other sectors, such as energy, to make sure that we provide countries and people around the world an understanding on how to reduce using energy and how to dispose of those obsolete PCs, and servers and all those, how to properly dispose of them in a better way to sustain a green environment. That's what we need to look at the global level.
Okay. And Robin, how do you see this paying out? Obviously the Qatar industry is fairly heavily dependent on oil and gas. How do we work with that?
I think Qatar is in a unique place in that it's a very small country, and it has huge potential in terms of its wealth based on hydrocarbons. And the point you make about the tension between climate change and energy consumption is very obvious in Qatar. What it requires government to do, and then every point along the value chain, is to consider the whole picture. We have to look at this problem, this challenge, in a holistic view. Because if you tinker with one bit of the value chain, it's bound to have unintended consequences elsewhere. If you can collaborate, and Qatar's a small country, so it should be more easy to collaborate. If you can identify where the opportunities and threats are, where you can make interventions that don't have unintended consequences, then I think you will make progress. If I pick up a couple of examples that are local to give you an idea of what I mean by that. In other parts of the world, the concept of working from home is well understood. And for some companies, working from home is an economic necessity to keep their overheads down or to maintain a quality of service. In this part of the world, the concept of working from home is not well understood. It's not part of government policy to promote it. It's not part of business practice to adopt it, and even at the individual, the concept of working sometimes from home and sometimes from the office is novel and as yet unchallenged. But we see a huge opportunity with some incentives from government to business and from business to the individual. There are incentives that can overcome some of those barriers, and that will have the consequence of reducing carbon emissions, and actually, in my view, taken from other parts of the world that adopt working from home, there will be benefits in productivity. There will be benefits of including within the workforce people who otherwise would be excluded. And in this part of the world, there are cultural and climatic and geographic, as well as economic reasons why people are excluded from the workforce. Now, all of those elements need to be looked at for the whole picture to bring about real change, from government through business down to the individual.
And if we think of the individual, and I'd just like to check in with Christian now, you gave an example where having meteorological information was very real to these fishermen in Lake Victoria. And earlier on, I saw some photos at another presentation of the impact of Katrina and Sandy. And, there was some part of me that said, well, that happened to those people over there. But I know that the weather's going to be the same tomorrow, because I'm living here in the Middle East. So my question to you is, how does we as a wider mass community, how can we feel different about climate change? Because, therein lies why we're going to be incentivized to start changing our lives, to implement ICT, to start having an impact on our carbon footprint. Where do we look, and how do we get that fundamental change across the entire mass?
Thank you to put this question. I think perhaps I have to clarify the role that an organization like WMO is doing in this conference. We are here to inform the parties on what is the science and what are the facts around the state of the atmosphere. Very recently we published a report on the concentration on greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, which, as you know, is the cause of our problem in terms of the consequence, which is global warming. And the news is not good. I mean, this year, or last year, more exactly 2011, the concentration had reached a peak, a record peak on concentration. So that's really bad news for the climate in general. And this is due to still increasing emission, as the UNEP has been able to report as well. And the two are linked, of course. So in terms of what the prospect and the challenge is, I think everybody is convinced that the decision making to improve and to take all these challenges up is to come from science-informed decision making. From our side, we try to bring the science. We are doing this in many respects. For example, as you may know, there is a World Research Climate Program, which is one of the most provider of scientific information to the IPCC, through which assessment report regularly. The world is informed on what is the state of the science, what is the state of the likely impact, and what are the scenarios with the consequences which are likely to take place. In order to support this, the World Meteorological Organization with other UN partnered governments are setting up what we call the Global Framework for Climate Services, which aim is to provide anyone from government, societies, individual with information which they need to make decision, well-informed decision. This Global Framework for Climate Services, GFCS as an acronym, has targeted four priority areas. One is food security and agriculture, the other one is water management, the third one is health, and the last one is disaster risk reduction. In all these domains, which are absolutely fundamental, I mean, information on weather and climate is essential. I mean, what climate changing is telling you is that the past is no more a reference to the future. So if you want to build anything from a dam, a nuclear power plant, whatever, take decision of which seeds you have to be used for next season, you have to rely on climate and weather information. So in this respect, ICT is absolutely essential by not only making this information accessible and reliable at any time, at any point in the world, but also it's essential because it provides, as was said already, a mean to really change the way we do business and we envisage the way we interact with our neighbors, with the atmosphere, with the ecological world around us. So this is absolutely fundamental, yes.
It's interesting that about a month ago there was an announcement that one country in the world is now facing a unique problem. They're so efficient at recycling that they're running out of rubbish.
Yeah, but
and that's we actually have a representative from that country. It's Sweden, and I think somehow in the history, you know, in the last years, decades, multiple decades, there would have been a certain number of events which would have triggered that. Because for me, that looks like a good place to learn a lesson that we could then, at an individual level, you know, harvest the collective effort to achieve such a thing, which results in that outcome. So, Matilda, I wonder if you would take off your Ericsson hat for a minute and put your Swedish one on and give us maybe some insights into that, because maybe that could be some interesting points to discuss.
Yes, it is interesting, and it's true that we're running out of garbage, which we are burning to get energy. But we are recycling very much in Sweden, and it's something that is done inside the homes, and we have different places where we put paper, plastics, metallics, and recycling of plastics like this, for example. So it's really in our genes to do this, and the relationship with nature and environment has probably a very, very long heritage. In Sweden we have something called allemansrätten, which would be like the old man's right, which means that we can walk past other man's land. And this has been since the 13th century. And they think that the background is that the purpose was to go to sacred places, and that everyone had the right to walk to sacred places, but we didn't have the roads. So for people to go to sacred places, whether that would be churches or whatever, you had to cross another person's land. And to do that, you had to do it with respect and with responsibility. So when you cross another man's land, you do it respectfully. You don't walk close to other houses. You don't put your garbage on the ground. You bring up anything. If you see garbage in the ground, you pick it up. So it's clean for the one who's coming afterwards, or for the one who's owning the land. So, and that's not a law in Sweden, it's a right. And it's been there since the 30th century. This has also made it possible for people to be outdoors. So my own kids, I have 2 daughters, they have been at outdoor daycare centers. In Sweden, it's cold, you know, during winter. And we don't have the best weather, but we put on clothes. And the kids are outside and they learn a lot about nature, what it looks like during the different seasons, how it changes and how it actually is changing now. So we get that very, very early, and also this with the respectfulness.
And I think that coming to Jesse, the Global Lead Sustainability Initiative, you mentioned a few things in your previous session, and I just want to pick up on something that was kicked off in COP18, the previous meeting, the transformation, because now we start to take these micro moments, and then we will start to implement ICT to change our day, to change our lives, to change our industry, to change our business. And an initiative that was kicked off in COP17 was transformation one day at a time, or...
I know it was the transformative step of the day.
Transformative step of the day. Thank you very much, Lewis. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think, I really like that whole, it just feels so simple, it feels very personable, it doesn't feel too big. Often we talk about, the world needs to do this and the world needs to do that. Transformative step of the day. What's been the best step so far that you've seen ICT and be embraced to achieve these ends?
Well, actually, it was a very, very simple idea, I would say. It was, we, together with the support of two companies that are sitting at this table, I don't want to promote the companies, but it was Deutsche Telekom and Ericsson. We launched an app solution whereby people through the app solution could present different ICT solutions which should be seen as somehow transformative in the way that we work and live. And the objective was to open a contest. So it was an open platform where anyone could put a solution, and then through a vote, an open vote, at that day, people would say, this is the best one, this is the one I think it's really transformative to drive sustainability. And during COP18, as you mentioned, I think it was 3 or 4 days at COP18, we allow people around the world to come up with those solutions and to show what kind of solutions are available that people is developing, which are really transformative, that contribute to a shift in the way that we work and live. And it was actually quite successful. The first winner was in China, which was very good. It had lots of attention, but we also had a governmental solution that won a prize. I remember, I think it was Denmark, I'm not sure, but that shows that really, let's say, the initiative took a lot of attention from different stakeholders, which in fact it was our objective. To some extent, with our initiative, we wanted to go a little bit out of the box. What we wanted to show in this open platform, in this very transparent manner, it was that there are many things out there that we do not know about, which really contribute to make our living more sustainable. And in this regard, ICT is really transformational. I don't think that you can think today about living without ICT. So shut down ICT and you'll see what happens to the world. The world will not work. Nothing will work. But if you put ICT, if you connect everything, if you collaborate, as you said, you need to look to the value chain. You need to look around what's around you. And if you look around and if you start to cooperate, then you will see the real transformation. That's the kind of approach that we need. We cannot stay back to back. We need to work together. And if we work together, we will have an impact. You mentioned the issue of waste. Yes, it is an issue, but we can address it. You need to educate people. You need to educate governments. Jesse ran the it was this year. We run the e-waste academy with the STEP initiative, the Solve the E-waste problem in Ghana. We trained 25 politicians to drive legislation to make this world more sustainable. And it was a very successful event, and the feedback we got from the 25 people that attended, and it was a selection process, a worldwide open selection process. We only had 25 seats, and we had 600 people wanting to sit in there. And it was really a success, and they went back to their respective countries to drive that legislative framework that needs to take place to resolve the e-waste, electronic waste issue. And we will continue to work on that direction. But that has to be done, and what we need is commitment, dialogue, and collaboration.
Interesting.
That's okay.
I'd like to open up to our audience. Any questions you'd like to pose to our panel? Anything sticky?
At the back there.
We have a question in the corner. Let's run over, hand that man a microphone. Sir, if you could just please introduce yourself.
My name is Australia. I'm from Samoa. I work with the Met department. Thank you for the talks that has been undertaken, and And I see just some observations of the globalization and the regional sectorial of the different in ICT. But if we look at it, the cost in different regions is very discriminatory. That's what I thought, whether this is driven by commercial ventures, or is there some strategy in order to be able to help struggling nations both in infrastructure and delivery of services? Because in different regions you can certainly see the difficulty in struggling in trying to deliver the service. Well, if you've got companies which is monopolizing the market and they are no competitive in the market, you see it's very expensive to deliver these services. For example, the GTS, the Global Telecommunication Services, which WMO is just about whipping the world with it. Services to us, especially to us islanders, are struggling to have the service because of the cost, immense cost. If you compare to developed countries, the cost is very cheap, because I know it's really driven by economics of the place and the number of people that can have the service. So my question really after all this is there some assistance in this area of subsidy or methodology which can be able to help developing countries?
Interventions to help the market work where perhaps economies of scale don't apply like they might in the developed world. Who'd like to grab that one?
Well, as someone from a regulator, I think I need to say something. I think most countries in the world will have a regulator in the telecom sector, and in most cases their function, one of their core functions, will be to promote a competitive marketplace for the provision of telecom services with two principal aims. One is to help drive down costs for the consumer, and the other is to increase the quality of service. Now, clearly, in both of those, there are a huge range of factors at play. And we recognise that if a marketplace has a single provider, there's very little incentive to drive down costs or increase quality of service. So bringing in new players to the market is a fairly straightforward process to generate competition. And some would say that more than two is an ideal situation, because that will create real competition as opposed to a selective duopoly where they carve up the shares and make huge profits. So it's a very complicated economic model, but the regulator's role is ultimately to provide low-cost and quality services. But of course not all ICT services are subject to regulation, in which case I suspect it's market forces, it's the quality of the product, it's a whole range of factors that will affect cost. You mentioned subsidies. Of course, in certain parts of the world, the provision of subsidies is tantamount to manipulating the market, and there are rules that would stop governments intervening in that. So it's a complicated picture, and as you say, it will vary from place to place and circumstance to circumstance.
Kees, I wonder, you travel around the world a bit in your role, obviously, and I think this question raises that, it's a really valid question. How do we see the government kind of intervening when competition doesn't deliver what the community wants? Is there any particular country that you've been to where you've come across that they've found the right balance of intervention or competition from an ITU perspective, that you thought those guys have kind of got the balance right? Because this is really what our friend is asking about.
Yes, there are many countries, there are many examples where there's competition and where there's a balance of competition which with the customers and also the service providers. I've been in the Pacific for the last 3 years, and there are examples in Samoa where the competitors, the competition is very, very tough, and where the regulator has to step in. Previously, there were a lot of court cases, but recently we have a regulator that's been there, and he's really stepped in and helped. And at this stage, now the two operators, competitors, are actually resolving their own problems. You know, they're talking to each other, and where there's no agreement, then the regulator steps in. And it's the same case as in Fiji. I've just been to Guatemala, and it's the same case. I think countries are now witnessing a maturity in competition. We're not quite there yet, but they are getting there. And this is where the benefits for the consumers come in, because without competition, the cost will still be up there. But as you mentioned, it's not an easy thing to do. There needs to be a balance, as we have seen. So those are some of the countries. And then when you go to some of the European countries in the EU, well, as we know, with the cost of the mobile roaming, it's actually coming down a great deal. The EU has stepped in. So these are the different paths around the world of driving market forces due to legislation and due to regulations.
Lewis, I wonder if you have come across an initiative somewhere in the world in your travels and your role of chairing the Global E-Sustainability Initiative, where you felt that government had really pinpointed something which was really, really simple, it was tangible, and it delivered some results, or it was on the verge of delivering some results. Was there some government that you might point out to, or some initiative that you might point out to, that the rest of us might keep in mind as we think about how government intervenes in order to help us get towards this low carbon future?
Well, it has already been said that our sector is really open. It's open to competition, and it's different from one place or from one continent to the other. So the pace of liberalization. So if you look today at Europe, it's a very open market. I don't know how many operators we have in Europe. If you look to the US, although you have competition, you have four main, let's say, competitors, and it's still, from my perspective, not comparable with the situation that we have in Europe. We would like the sector to remain a competitive sector, an open sector, because that will drive more innovation, and that will speed up the benefits that one can take out from our industry. It's very important that this openness, that this competition remains, but I think that there are also some boundaries to competition. One of the problems that we are seeing today, so if you go back to frequencies, to networks, so in Germany we have each operator has its own network. Is that sustainable? Probably not. So we need to think about also some cooperation here, because in fact what we see that in some, let's say, some parts of the day the networks are not being fully used, but they are still consuming energy. So we need to look at it also from a different perspective. What is also interesting to see is now with the broadband deployment, and we are talking about broadband, deployment of broadband costs a hell of a money. Only in Germany, to deploy broadband to all citizens, that will cost to Deutsche Telekom around 60 billion euros. And no other company is in a position to deploy broadband as our company. And the regulator is looking at us as the one that has the obligation to do it. But we are on a competitive market. But the regulator is not looking at other companies competing in our market. They expect us to deploy broadband to every single citizen. So I can, your question was very concise in terms of giving an example. I cannot give you an example. What I can tell you is that it's important that the telecommunications sector remains competitive, an open sector, because that will drive innovation and that will allow people, citizens, consumers to benefit, and also, of course, business to benefit from the sector. And I hope that it goes on that way, but also in a sensible manner. So the regulators can also need to look what is moving around, because we don't live in closed doors today. We live in a global market, and we are global companies as well. So we also need a kind of framework which allows us to operate globally in a sustainable manner, and also in order to harness the benefits of telecommunications to all citizens.
Sure. Any other questions from my audience in the front here? Nothing sticky coming to mind. Okay, we've got another few minutes left. Let's see what else I've got on my list here. I'd like to ask each of you in turn the best single innovation that you've seen which is helping take us in that direction. It's the biggest single innovation that you think that is helping us get to this low carbon future, starting with you, Matilda. In short, the best single innovation you've seen that you believe will help us get to where we need to go.
A single innovation is difficult, but I would say the area of smart grids.
Smart grids.
Yes,
Energy
definitely.
management. Okay, fantastic.
Yes.
Christian Blondin, what would you say?
Yeah, perhaps if you allow me, I will say a word to my
Sure,
colleagues
of course.
and try to put this question into perspective. He mentioned the global telecommunication system, which is shared by and run by the WMO to exchange information all around the world. I mean, the World Meteorological Organization has started to develop the future of this global telecommunication system, which is called the WMO Information System. And of course, if we have to rely on local operator for the end users to be reached, as we say, the last mile has to be provided by either mobile equipment or whatever. For the global exchange of information, it's a massive amount of information. We try to work, as we always did in metrology, through international collaboration and cooperation. And for example, of course, we use internet to exchange most and more of our information, whether it's observation or products that is done by products that are done by Med Services in particular, but also we rely on satellite and telecommunication satellite, so that from one provider using upward transmission, then you can bring the information at a very effective cost to a lot of users. And just to name one project or one innovation, for example, UMedCast, which is a project run by the UMedSat European organization for operational meteorology, has deployed its system across almost all continents, so that the information is made available to Med Services in a very cost-effective way. If I had to perhaps illustrate one innovative thing to try to answer your question, I share the view of my neighbors that it's rather difficult, but I am tempted to say that what you see now on media like TV, for example, or internet, is quite fantastic. Anyone at Fingerprint can have a med forecast or a climate forecast. The issue, by the way, is how reliable is this information, from who is it coming from. And you will mention Sandy, for example, as an example. This hurricane has touched the US, but also is touched Haiti. So the most powerful, perhaps, country and one of the poorest. And the effect is the same. Almost a lot of casualties, and thanks to ICT, the warning were able to be delivered much more in the US perhaps than in IT, but the consequence is still the same. So I would like to see that the innovation is more that this tool is bringing information which is needed to everyone in real time.
So we are investing to bring connectivity to those of us in the Polynesia. I'm very happy that my cousins from Samoa managed to take out the Dubai Rugby Sevens. I don't know if you were watching that. They demolished the New Zealanders, so I was a little bit divided in the result, but they really deserve that. Lewis, in your travels, if there was one innovation that you thought, wow, that was fantastic, what would that be?
Well, the one I like the best is one that we are not using actually, is
Right.
video conferencing.
Okay.
That I would like us to use that innovation more and more. But I think at the end of the bottom line here, I think is the internet at the end of the day. So because the internet is really what provides us, I would say, the overall infrastructure where all these things are coming up and allow people to have probably a better quality of life. But my favorite thing is video conferencing, and my biggest regret is that we are not using it.
Fantastic. Gisa, in your travels you found, I'm sure, many innovations. What's your favourite one you'd like to share with us?
In terms of climate change, my favorite one is solar powers. I suppose because it relates very directly to my part of the world, where we have more sun than there's no, we don't have winter. But in terms of countries, I really like the Stockholm Royal Seaport Sustainable City Project because it has broadband in the heart of it. So I believe that broadband or the internet, as Luis mentioned, is one great invention. Now, before we finish, I'd like to say a little bit about the publication that is sitting there. The key point for me is that the message from this publication is that broadband is the missing part of the puzzle. And we have examples like, as I mentioned, the Swedish Stockholm Royal Seaport, and also the fact that in the book, Sweden emerged as best practice. So this is the core thing in the publication, which has been translated into the 6 UN languages. And the other major point from it is that policymakers need to make bold decisions and make bold policies, and ensuring that these policies are in place to promote innovation, environmental standards, and eliminate the barriers to low carbon technologies, and of course encourage the private sector investment. I mean, with bold vision, enabling the policy environment, we can turn this unprecedented global challenge into an opportunity to create a more sustainable world.
Robin, your favourite innovation?
Well, I'm going to take a holistic view. I've done that throughout the session, and I'm going to cheat because I'm going to mention 3 different parts of the value chain. For me, at the individual end, the most significant invention has been an icon to drive the technology. For me, technology is at its best when it's invisible to the user. All the back-end stuff is invisible. You press a little icon, something good happens for you. And this has brought millions of people into computing that otherwise they couldn't, because they didn't have the digital literacy to be able to run the computer. So the icon, that little picture, has brought people into technology from which they will flourish. So that was one. 2, the development of fibre to the home and a service across it, the virtual private network, which brings with it such opportunity, high-speed data connections, security, which will allow businesses to to connect, to offer services undreamt of. It will allow us as individuals to video conference effectively. It will allow us to work from home. It will allow us to collaborate in a way that we would have never dreamt before without leaving our home. Think of the benefit of that. And finally, cloud computing and cloud storage. Why on earth would we want to keep all our data on individual devices when we can have it somewhere out there, much more effectively stored, saved and backed up, and the production costs of all of those devices can disappear, and we can go anywhere, do anything and get all of our stuff together. So for me, those three little steps on the road for ICT will bring about bigger climate change than any of those inventors ever dreamt of.
Sure.
But together, they will make that big difference. Without even thinking, it's the unintended consequences will be the benefit to the climate.
Fantastic. Now we're going to close up in a moment, so there's a last call for any questions, any sticky questions from our audience. You know, I think I heard some best practice. We talk about best practices, and I think, and also broadband at the heart of new cities. And I think, you know, cities, we created these cities just because they were there for historical reasons for hundreds of years. And then we started to put technology inside them, and then we started to learn from them, and we started to transform them. And I think one of the most exciting things about this region is what might we learn when we build cities from scratch with this ICT, you know, agenda at heart. What might we take from those best practices and take back to our other cities, which are just normal plain old cities, and who knows where those innovations might come from. So I'd like to invite each of you to give us a closing comment. I'll finish in reverse order from what we started, so we'll end up with Robin with the last word as the host nation. Perhaps if you'd like to finish this sentence, Matilda, when it comes to lowering our carbon impact, when it comes to improving climate change, we really need to make sure whatever we do is... how would you finish that sentence? We must make sure we...
Sorry, I couldn't hear your beginning.
So if we think about our objectives, if we think about what we're trying to achieve, if there was one statement that you would make that we should all keep in mind, whatever we do, we need to make sure that we...
Keep to our intention. So the fundamental intention, what is the direction, where are we heading? That is the key thing we need to keep in mind. So we always know the track we're going on. And then we follow with the actions and the decisions to that.
Thank you very much. Christian Blondin, whatever we do, we need to make sure we
make the future well-informed in terms of science, up-to-date, state-of-the-art, so that, as I said, any decision-making is very well informed by the latest and most accurate climate prediction. Thank you.
Luis Neves, whatever we do, we must...
Well, I think that we need to strengthen cooperation, to understand the full potential of ICT, to harness and to really be up to the challenges that we are facing today, and therefore my expectation is that through this collaboration process, ICT together with other industry sectors really make the transformational change that is needed to tackle climate change.
Gisa Fuertai Purcell.
For mine, it's very simple. We need to act quickly and scale up fast. Thank you.
Robin Blake, you have the last word. Whatever we do, we need to make sure we...
Well, I continue where I started. We need to focus on the people. It is the people that will make the difference. It is the people who will drive government's agenda. It's the people who will drive the marketplace. It's the people who will drive society. And those are the three key elements that will bring about real climate change.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to thank the panelists, thank the panel, thank our audience for your participation, and I hope you'll enjoy the talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.